Shalom, everyone. This is Parashat Shavua with Reb Shlomo Carlebach from the book Evan Shlomo. What we're going to do is the following. For those who are aware, those in Israel are reading a different parsha every week than those outside of Israel. That was because Shavuos, which in Israel is only one day, it was on Friday and Shabbat. So we already read on Shabbat the next parsha. But outside of Israel, the second day was the second day of Shavuot. And so therefore there was a special reading that was not Parshat HaShavua. So this coming week in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, is Parshat Shlach. In Israel, it's Korach. So what we're going to do is the following, is since the majority, I might even say the vast majority of people watching, not just live, because remember, as we share it, hundreds of people are watching during the week, and the vast majority are outside of Israel. So we're going to do the upcoming Shabbat for those outside of Israel. For those in Israel, we're just going to be reviewing what we read on Shabbat. We already read Parshat Shlach, but as we said, that there are people who, when they learn Parsha, they learn it from Tuesday to Tuesday, and not from Sunday through Shabbos and then start a whole new Parsha. So this way, we're kind of hopefully satisfying everyone. That is our intent, that is for sure. And that's what we're going to be doing. It's another 4 or 5 weeks that we're going to be in this situation until the two coordinate together once again. I will, of course, let you know when that happens. So we're doing Parshat Shlach. For those who have the book, Evan Shlomo, we're starting on page 205. And as most of these parshiot, there's way too much material to be able to cover it in the short amount of time that we have. So I pick out different of the Torahs, and sometimes even within one Torah, I only do some of the paragraphs. So here, and I've been trying to read it because those who edited this tried as much as possible to stick with the way Reb Shlomo spoke. All of these came from transcripts from tapes. Remember tapes? Before there were different ways to record. There were tape machines. Okay, so we're starting on page 205. And of course, Shlach is the whole story of the 12 spies that were sent in order to spy out the land of Israel. They were there for 40 days. They came back, and 10 of the 12 gave what's called an evil report, and basically convinced the people that we would not be able to go into the land. We were not able to conquer the land. And then people said, well, let's pick new leaders and let's go back to Egypt. So it was, of course, a terrible situation. In the end, Moshe prays for forgiveness for the people, and God does forgive them, but nonetheless makes it very clear that the generation of men between 20 and 60 would not merit to come into the land. And that's the background of the whole story, how we ended up wandering in the desert for 40 years. So that's just the overview. So this is what Reb Shlomo says. Moshe Rabbeinu sent the most outstanding Yidden to Eretz Yisrael to be the spies. Rashi explains that the word anashim, that's the word in Hebrew for the men that he sent, refers to great people. The Kli Yakar a very, very well-known commentator, says that God says to Moshe, if I were you, I'd send women, but I know you will send men. So this is not Reb Shlomo's Chiddush. This is the Kli Yakar, says that God subtly or however expressed to Moshe, you'd be better off sending women. Why? Since the men participated in the sin of the golden calf, their eyes were not so clear anymore. The women did not participate in the golden calf, so their eyes were clear. They would have been able to see Eretz Yisrael for real. So this already, of course, is a very, call it innovative idea, a chidush of the Kli Yakar, which obviously Reb Shlomo liked very much. But now he's going to add his own chiddush here. And this is really a complete chiddush from Reb Shlomo. Listen to what he says. Now listen to the deepest depths. Why were Miriam and Aaron so angry at Moshe that he wasn't living with his wife Zipporah? And why do we read about this right before Parashat Shlach? Just to remind you, at the end of the previous Parsha, Balotcha, Miriam and Aaron complain to God about Moshe separating from his wife. They thought it was inappropriate. And they said, we're also prophets, and we didn't separate from our spouses, and we don't think it's a good example for the people. That's where God explains to Moshe and Aaron the difference between Moshe and all other prophets in all of history, not just at that time. And also reveals it wasn't really Moshe's decision. God reveals that it was really his instruction to Moshe. But still, I think we learned this previously, that, or maybe we didn't because I was on vacation in Sfat, but we learned that in a certain way, Moshe and Aaron were correct, that this was not a normative practice. None of the prophets separated from their wives, or the women prophets from their husbands. And we're actually told in the future, Mashiach not only will be married, but needs to be married. So listen what Reb Shlomo says. He says, now listen, so he says, Miriam and Aaron, again, and then he's asking, what's the juxtaposition? Why is that story at the end of the previous Parsha right next to the beginning of this Parsha? So Reb Shlomo says like this, Miriam and Aaron saw by a clear prophecy that if Moshe Rabbeinu would send women, the women would come back and say that Eretz Yisrael is good. And then Moshe Rabbeinu would be able to go into Eretz Yisrael with the rest of the nation. Miriam and Aaron thought that if he had lived with Zipporah, his wife, who also had a clear prophecy, she would be the one to tell him to send 12 women. So they were angry at Moshe, saying, if you were living with Zipporah, maybe you would have sent women instead of men and would have stayed alive. So in other words, their anger isn't even in the definition of what we call anger. They actually had Moshe's best interests in mind. And they had this, we'll call it unclear prophecy, that if he would have sent women instead of men, that not only would they have come back and been able to give a good report, but then Moshe Rabbeinu would have been able to come in. So I see that Tova just asked, Zipporah had prophecy. Zipporah was not an official prophetess. And to be honest, I'm not sure why Shlomo put that she also had a clear prophecy. Not clear to me why he put that. It could be because Miriam and Aaron had a relationship with Zipporah. It was their sister-in-law. And they might have understood from her that in a certain way, she understood what the problem was with being separated from her husband. And maybe she had a clearer insight into this whole matter. But no, she was not one of the official prophetesses, but there are many, many people who had Ruach HaKodesh, who had divine inspiration. But again, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why Reb Shlomo put it like that. So that's the first idea that Reb Shlomo is sharing. But what's very, very important is what we see that, first of all, we have a phrase that says, B'schut Nashin Tzidkaniyot Yitzanu Mitzrayim. On the merit of the righteous women, we came out of Egypt, because they really kept the faith. They ensured that there would be babies, there would be a new generation. Miriam is the one who convinced her father, who had separated from his wife because they were drowning all the boys. And she said to him, "You're as bad as Paro. He's only killing the boys, but by separating from your wife and making an example for everyone else in Israel, there'll be no boys or girls." And then he got back together with his wife. So Reb Shlomo is just pointing out that not only on the merit of the righteous women, but the women did not, according to tradition, did not participate in the golden calf, and they did not believe the 10 spies. So that is the basis of why Reb Shlomo is saying this. And again, he's basing it on the Kli Yakar. That was his chiddush, the idea that women should be sent. It was Reb Shlomo's chiddush of the juxtaposition of the previous parsha of why Miriam and Aaron were objecting to Moshe separating from his wife. Okay, now we're going to page 208. And here I'm just picking up in the second part of this Torah. So page 208, it says, and I really, really like this idea. We already learned this in Parashat Bamidbar. A lot of people write commentaries on certain passages in the Parsha. Then there are some who write a commentary on the whole Parsha. But when it comes to a commentary on the essence of the whole book, there is no one like the Ishbitzer Rebbe. As we should know by now, Reb Shlomo quotes the Ishbitzer and the whole school of Ishbitz more than anyone else. In his later years, he became very, very connected to all of the teachings of the school of Ishbitz, and he was learning from it all the time. And I could say, in great measure, Reb Shlomo made the teachings of Ishbitz as popular as they are today. Of course, he's not the only one that was learning Ishbitz, but it was not a major school of Chassidut that was studied in wider circles. And Reb Shlomo really, really changed that. So what he's saying is, and we learned this at the beginning of Bamidbar, that the Ishbitzer was talking about the whole book, trying to find the theme running through the whole book. So the Ishbitzer explains in Me'er Shiloach that the essence of Bamidbar, the whole book of Bamidbar, is God telling us stories about holy people who failed. First in Bahalotcha, then in Shlach Lecha, meaning this parsha, then in Korach, then in Chukast. Even Moshe Rabbeinu hits the rock. Holy people going wrong. In Bamidbar, we are not talking about the outside world. We are talking about holy people. So this is a very, very important thing. If you remember, here he's not reviewing it, but the Ishbitzer called the book of Bamidbar the book of mistakes. And when you think about it, the Torah is a holy book. So you would think that in a holy book, they're not going to expose the holy people to such scrutiny. But here, so much of the book of Bamidbar is about people making mistakes and holy people making mistakes. We just learned about how Miriam and Aaron were mistaken about Moshe in a certain way. And Moshe himself, towards the end, hits the rock, and because of that, can't come into Israel. Okay, so Reb Shlomo continues. Reb Leibele Eger, so he's one of the school of Ishbitz in his book Torah Emet, says that everything which you saw may be right, but you don't see what the bigger picture is. In other words, the spies came back, and in a certain level, they gave a correct report. Their only mistake was the conclusion that we can't go into the land. The fact that the people were strong there was correct. And they reported that the land was a land flowing with milk and honey and was incredibly productive. But they said that the cities are well fortified and there were giants there. All of that was true. The problem was their conclusion, therefore, we can't really trust God's promise that he's going to bring us into the land. That was their problem. So Reb Shlomo continues, I want you to know something very deep. There is a knowledge I get from hearing something, and there is a knowledge I get from seeing something. Then there is a type of knowledge that is deeper than seeing or hearing and even knowing. The Holy Ziditcher gave over a teaching in the name of the Seer of Lublin. He asked him, where do you see what you just said? So in other words, the Ziditchover was giving over a Torah to the Rebbe of Lublin. And the Rebbe of Lublin said, where did you hear this? So he answered, in a book. And the Lubliner says, whose book? And he said, in my book. In other words, this is my chiddush. This is my innovative idea. I saw it in a book, my book. So here what he's saying is there's a knowledge that comes from hearing, there's a knowledge that comes from seeing, and then there's a knowledge coming from a deeper level. Obviously, the Ziditchover connected to a very, very high place to draw down a new idea in Torah. So he continues, and this next sentence, it really blew me away personally. He says, besides all the books we read, we have to have our own book, which is deeper than all the seeing and all the hearing. This kind of seeing is the deepest depths. So why did it affect me so much? I think I've mentioned this before. I'm constantly rereading the books that I wrote. Constantly. Every week, I'm rereading the books that I wrote. Not that they're better than anything else, but they are my books. But here, that's why it touched me so deeply, this idea that each and every one of us has innovative ideas, has chidushim, has the ability to draw down new ideas. I can certainly testify because after all of our classes, when we have our discussion group, we hear all these incredible ideas from so many of you. And if you remember, I'm constantly telling people, make sure to write down these ideas, because that's really where my classes come from and my books come from. When I have an idea, I write it down. I have file cabinets full of the ideas that came to me. And if I didn't write them down, I wouldn't remember them. So I'm encouraging everyone. That's what he's saying. He's saying, besides all the books we read, we have to have our own book, which is deeper than all the seeing and all the hearing. This kind of seeing is the deepest depths. So I'm blessing all of us to take Reb Shlomo up on this challenge. Okay, continuing on page 210. This one's called Connected to Where I'm Supposed to Be. So the first paragraph begins like this. Anything in the world that can stop me from doing something I want means that there's something lacking in the connection. If I love something on the level that I'm ready to die for it 1,000,000 times, nothing in the world can stop me. In other words, if a person has obstacles, then in a certain way, maybe there's something missing in the connection. Or if it's something that, again, we're just using the expression, worth dying for, then maybe it's not that important. So he gives an example. I'm not going to read it word by word, but he's saying if someone is up on a roof and they jump off the roof, well, for sure they're going to get injured or worse. He said, but what happens if, God forbid, your child falls off the roof? You would jump off and you would be able to save them without getting hurt. And of course, we all know in our own lives or stories that we've read of people who have been able to do practically superhuman feats in times of danger. When the hormones kick in, but it's not just hormones, it's because I'm willing to die 100 times to save this person. So he says like this, now when the spies came back, they spoke of the hardships of Eretz Yisrael and how difficult it would be to conquer it. What does that mean? I would love to move to, now he's giving an example. I would love to move to, he's talking about what people think or say. I would love to move to Israel. It's very beautiful, but really it's too dangerous to go there. I have a wife and family. I don't want to endanger their lives. In other words, he's giving a real example, super real example of people who actually really love Israel and would want to be here and are super Zionistic, but there's something stopping them and they don't come. Maybe they come on vacation, contribute money, send their own children to yeshiva, or sometimes the children decide to go into the army. So here he's just giving an example of this idea. So I'm skipping a couple of paragraphs, but on page 211, he says, if God blesses you, you get a taste of being connected to that one thing you have to be connected to. If you are connected to that one thing that your whole life depends upon, the whole world can't move you. Nobody can move you. Nobody can stop you. So here, he's not quoting it, but there's a phrase from the sages that says, Ein davar omed lifnei haratzon. Nothing stands against one's will. In other words, if someone wants it bad enough, they will find a way. Again, obviously there are exceptions, but in general, the difference between making it or succeeding is how important is it to you? How connected are you to realizing this? And so obviously, why is he talking about this here? Because the idea is that the 10 spies, they didn't have this ratzon. Yoshua and Caleb, so they did. They spoke very positively and said, we can do it. God promised we can do it. Yes, there will be obstacles. And yes, it may be difficult, but we can do it. That's the difference between the 10 spies and the 2 spies. So Reb Shlomo is just trying to explain that from a, call it emotional or psychological level. The question is how much do you want something? How much do you want something? Now, obviously, there's certain things that we want, and we don't succeed in getting it or fulfilling it. But in general, the idea is the more we want something, the more we're connected to it, the more of a chance we have to succeed. It's a very, very important idea. And now the next one on page 212, that Torah flows right into this one. And this one is just super relevant to everyone. It's called Got to Try Again. Imagine I take upon myself to keep Shabbos. And even though I'm working really hard and connecting to it, it just doesn't go. What happens to me then? There are 2 ways before me. I might come to the conclusion that this just isn't for me. Or maybe I'll make myself stronger and say to myself, I have to try again. If I try and I end up being disappointed in myself, I'll end up dropping Shabbos altogether, since I cannot walk around hating myself. Therefore, I have to make an excuse saying it is what it is. I'm just not up to Shabbos. But if I am strong enough, I say, okay, take a deep breath. It doesn't work the first few times, but I will try again. So I want to share. I know I've shared this at least once. Maybe someone remembers this. Probably most people don't. But I had a very, very almost life-changing conversation with Reb Shlomo. And I came to him with a question. And the question was, when a person sets a goal and really wants to accomplish this, but all kinds of obstacles keep on coming up and get in the way of succeeding. How do you interpret that? I said, because there's 2 different opinions in Hasidut what to do. One of them might say, well, if you're getting all of this opposition and all these obstacles, maybe heaven is trying to tell you that what you're trying to succeed isn't all that important, or that's not what you should be doing right now. Rabbi Nachman very strongly has the opposite opinion. If you have all kinds of obstacles, it's a sign that you're really trying to do something good. Of course, there's going to be obstacles. Of course, the other side, the Yetzer Hara, is going to try to stop you. So if you have obstacles, then that's a sign that what you're trying to do is good and you should push forward. So I asked Reb Shlomo, how do you know the difference? It was a classic question, but I was really asking it for real. And I'll never forget, Reb Shlomo like looked up at the heavens, and a lot of times when he was really thinking, he would start like shuckling back and forth. And sometimes his eyes would practically roll back into his head. And so I could tell that he wanted to give me like the best answer he could. And when he was ready, he said, very simply, he said, to answer this, you have to have Ruach HaKodesh. You have to have divine inspiration. And to have divine inspiration, you have to pray. That's all he said. So someone might think he was just trying to get out of giving a more substantial answer. No, what he was saying was so right on, because how do you know the difference? How do you know the difference? So the only way is to really daven with your whole being that God helps us know the difference. Is this a sign I should stop? Or is this a sign I should go forward? And I've used that ever since. And I can't say that the answer comes to me immediately. Sometimes it takes a long time. But in most cases, a certain clarity eventually reveals itself as to which direction should I go? How should I interpret the obstacles? So now I'm going to read one more paragraph. So the Alexander Rebbe in the book Yismach Yisrael says that this is essentially the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and the spies. Moshe Rabbeinu's anava, his humbleness, was that he realized that he hadn't served God the way he should, but he was a savlan. He had a lot of patience, and he could bear it. The spies were very holy, but they were not on this level. For them, if they felt that they couldn't overcome that which they were working on, they understood it meant it's not for them. So they go to Israel for 40 days, and they see this is not going to be so simple. And they gave up. They come back and say, we can't do it. We can't do it. He's saying, Moshe Rabbeinu, if you think about it, how many times did he have to stand up to the people? And yet he never gave up on the people. In this parsha, God even offers, the second time that God offers to, as it were, wipe out the whole people and start all over from Moshe. After the golden calf and this time. And so you could say, well, Moshe could say, well, they just said they're going to appoint new leaders and they're going to go back to Egypt. Like, I give up. I give up. But he had the patience and he didn't let the obstacles get in his way. The spies gave up. Here they are coming into the Holy Land. They see it's a totally different story from that which they were used to. In the desert, as it were, we had no problems. Food was coming down from heaven. We had water from the well of Miriam. A cloud would come down every Friday afternoon, washing our clothes. Your garments would grow with you. Everything was absolutely miraculous. When the spies came to the Holy Land, they realized it's a different story. In the land of Israel, God wants you to plow your field. Food doesn't come down from heaven. But you see what it is to feel high in Israel, fulfilled in Israel, takes more than whatever you thought Eretz Yisrael. What you thought, Eretz Yisrael is a different kind of high. Now here, Reb Shlomo is talking to the generation of the 60s and the 70s, where, as it were, getting high was the vernacular, meaning being in a higher level of consciousness. So now I'm skipping a paragraph. The question is, after you tried once and you couldn't do it, what stops you from trying again? The Alexander says that this stems from utmost arrogance. What makes you think that if you tried and it didn't go, it means that you can't do it or that it can't be done? Very interesting what he's saying, that there's an arrogance. If you come against an obstacle and you can't get beyond it at first, like your pride kicks in and like I'm such a great person. And if I can't accomplish this the first time, it's not worth doing. In other words, my ability to like dance through life with no obstacles is my reality. I don't accept this thing that I have to work hard and I might have to try a second and third time to get it right. So these are things that we all struggle with. There's no one who doesn't have challenges. Question is, how do we deal with the challenges? So here's what he says. Parashat Shlach shows us the way of entering the Holy Land. As hard as it is to be high outside of Israel, in Israel, listen to what he says, it's absolute murder. In other words, yes, it is hard living here. Let's not kid ourselves. Why is it so hard to bring Yiddishkeit in Eretz Yisrael? I might be able to turn on all of Brooklyn to Yiddishkeit, but it's very hard to turn on all of Tel Aviv, because this is really where it's all at. If it's where it's at, the harder it is. Sometimes you go to Israel and you don't feel anything. You come to the Holy Wall and you are like a stone. The wall is not the stone, you are the stone. This simply means that you have to try more. The holiness of the Holy Land is that is a place where we always try again. Our mission to the world for all of Yiddishkeit and for the holiness of Yidden is try again, be humble and bear it. These are very I would say not typical Reb Shlomo kind of Torah, this one that we just read. In a certain way, he's taking on like a hard edge. He's usually like the optimist, the dispenser of love and joy and spiritual enlightenment. Here, he's like very down to earth, saying, yes, the Holy Land is hard. I think everyone knows it's not just the last 2.5 years. There was a war in 48, 56, 67, 73, then in 81 in Lebanon. Then that war continued for 20 years. Then there was the first Intifada, 87. Then the second Intifada, 2001. Then 3 or 4 wars in Gaza. Can't even remember the dates. 2006, 2013, 2018. And then these last 2021. And then the last 2.5 years. Is that enough for everyone? And you know what? Everyone knows this. Every year they do this survey of all the countries in the world. It's like the happiness meter. How happy are people in the countries that they live? They have all kinds of economic and cultural and this and that. Israel's always in the top 10. Always in the top 10. And none of the others are in a state of war for all these years, 78 years, non-stop. I didn't mention all the terrorism in between. If everyone knows today, there were 3 terrorist attacks and 2 soldiers were killed in Lebanon, just today. And yet, this is what he said, try again, be humble and bear it. This is Reb Shlomo being at his most real. Okay, now the next one is on 214. And here I'm only picking up on 3 of the paragraphs. He says like this, it's the 2 last paragraphs on the page. And here he says something so important. He says, who are the people who are lonely and desperate? Not people who do everything wrong. You'd think people who do everything wrong are going to be depressed and lonely. Not necessarily. There are a lot of people doing a lot of wrong who think that they're happy and successful. So he says, not people who do everything wrong. The loneliest people in the world are those who, in the deepest depths of their hearts, don't find anything they are connected to. Meaning they're not connected to their purpose in this world. They don't have a definitive purpose. What am I doing here? They're lacking that connection. He continues, I can love 100 people, be interested in 200 religions, and know 2 million books by heart, and yet it can all mean nothing. I need one person. I need one thing I'm connected to in the deepest depths of my heart. This is such a basic teaching from Reb Shlomo. If you remember, give me a second. Someone can help me in the chat, even though I know his name very well, but it was a psychologist who went through Auschwitz, and he wrote a very, very, very famous book called In Search of Meaning. Why his name escapes me right now, I can't say. If anyone knows, please. Viktor Frankl, thank you, Brenda. Viktor Frankl wrote this classic book. And I'm not going to tell now, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe encouraged him very much. There was one time in his life, man searched for meaning. He was about to give up on his whole career. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent him an emissary telling him, I know of your work. Do not give up. Stick with it. What you're saying is really important. And he did. And this book was a classic book. So here, Reb Shlomo's not mentioning him per se, but Viktor Frankl is not the only one to think of this. The idea that without meaning in life, without having a purpose, this could be the most depressing and loneliest feeling in the world. So I just want to bless everyone. And it doesn't, there's all kinds of meaning. And it doesn't even mean that we have one meaning. We can have many meanings. But it's, if you can imagine someone who is not connected to anything or anyone, you can imagine what kind of life they're living. So I just bless all of us to be connected to other people, to be connected to a purpose in this world. Okay, now we're on page 217. This one is called, What Are You Tasting? This whole parsha of the week is the deepest secret of life. The truth is that everything is a miracle. Everything is God. On the other hand, I still have to be active in this process and not rely on miracles. The acid test is if I know exactly where the borders of my Hishtadlut and Bitachon are. Hishtadlut means the effort that I have to make in life. And Bitachon means the trust that I have in myself and that God is with me. I'll go on. On the one hand, I have to open a, now I'm just giving an example. On one hand, I have to open a store, sit in the store from 9 to 5, and try to sell my merchandise. Now, obviously, this is an example for anyone who works on anything. I only have those $100 because God wants me to have $100. In other words, I earned $100 this week. So why do I have the $100? Because God wants me to have these $100. The question is, why did I have to work for it? In other words, if God is going to give me $100, why don't I just trust that everything is in God's hand? God will take care of everything. Try paying the rent that way. Try putting food on the table that way. Good luck. But that's what Reb Shlomo is saying. He's saying there's a paradox here. On one hand, we have to have the trust that without God's help, we could all the efforts in the world are not going to produce anything. On the other hand, if we only trust that God is going to do everything, then we're going to end up with nothing. We have to make our effort. We have to make our effort. So he says, the question is, why did I have to work for it? Because God wants me to work. It's crazy, but this is what it is. Take it or leave it. As much as we know that everything is supernatural and filled with miracles, God wants everything to be on a natural level. If we want to conquer a country, you have got to send out spies. You have to know where to walk in and where to walk out. Sadly enough, at the time of the spies, they didn't know the borders. They hadn't learned yet where they were, meaning borders of the effort that we have to make and the kind of trust that they had in God. They didn't know where is the line. They hadn't learned yet where they were, both physically and spiritually. The holiness of Israel is knowing exactly where the borders are. The holiness of Israel is that I know exactly how much I have to do and how much I have to rely on God. But this is true for all of us. This is just a general, universal idea that Reb Shlomo is giving over here. And just one example is at the burning bush, when God comes to Moshe and says, I'm appointing you as the leader. You're going to go back to Egypt and you're going to bring the people out of Egypt from slavery to freedom. And we know from tradition that Moshe argued with God for an entire week. And he had all kinds of different excuses. Some of them were in his eyes, were very legitimate. But one of them, and it's not an excuse, but he said to God, what do you need me for? You're going to be doing the miracles. You're going to be the one bringing the people out. What do you need me for? And this is where, in such a strong way, it's established that God always wants human agency, that we have to do our part. So God would come to Moshe, take your staff and hit the water. It wasn't Moshe doing the miracle. He didn't turn the water into blood. God turned the water into blood. And yet, Moshe had to he had to be the channel. For those who already have the book Maaseh Merkavah, this is one of the ideas, that the chariot is, the expression is ha'avot hen ha'merkavah. The patriarchs and the matriarchs, they were the chariot. They were the chariot that God, as it were, could ride on to bring his energy into the world. And so the same thing here. In other words, the problem wasn't sending spies. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the report that they came back and they discouraged the people, and the people were ready to give up. These are all the themes that Reb Shlomo was talking about not giving up. And here, knowing that we had to come into the land and we had to conquer it. But without God's help, we most certainly would not have succeeded. Even today, it's the same thing. We have to go through the motions, the very painful motions of defending the country of Israel. And yet, without God's help, we just take it for granted how strong Israel is. But I invite anyone just to look at a map and see Israel in relationship to 20 Arab countries and over 1 billion Muslims, and ask, it's because we're so strong that we're able to survive? On one hand, yes, and we pay in blood. But without God's help, no way would we be able to do it. Okay. I think that's a good place to stop. Of course, there's so much more here. But I think we'll stop here because I want to give enough time for our discussion group. So we'll end with a blessing. As Rabbi Nachman said, Ein yeyush ba'olam. There is no giving up in this world. There's no feeling that there's nothing I can do. And I want to end by quoting a very, very good friend of mine who passed away around 10 years ago, Michael Golem, Shalom. And he used to say, he was the Gabbai, he used to give blessings, but he wouldn't give the standard blessing. He would pull down these blessings, but he would say so many times, never, ever, ever, ever give up. That was one of the blessings he gave to so many people. Never, ever, ever give up. So we should all be blessed in our private lives, in the life of all of Israel, to keep that in mind.